As Prasanna and the other colleagues said, I came to Christ 7 years ago. Before that, I was a Hindu priest for 20 years of my life. I was in charge of Europe and Russia for a very affluent, influential and wealthy Hindu organization. So my journey began, I'll explain a little about Gujaratis. They don't need much explanation, I'm sure. One thing you know, they're very business-minded people. They're very money-minded people. Some in a good way, others in not so much of a good way. So my great-grandfather left Gujarat in 1898 and traveled to Kenya by boat. Kenya, Uganda and Tanzania were British colonies just as much as India in those days. So he went to Kenya to help the British build the railway. So although I'm a Gujarati, my parents are Gujarati, they were all born in Kenya, in East Africa. As you may be aware, in Uganda there was the instability because of Idi Amin, and a lot of Gujaratis were thrown out of Uganda, and those who had British passports were given immediate asylum in the UK. Before this situation took place in Uganda in 1970, in Kenya there was also some instability. Certain politicians were not very happy with Gujaratis having so much money and so much wealth and so much business in their hands. My father's father had a construction business and in the 1960s, and he had 4,000 people working for him and accumulated a lot of wealth. Suddenly one day, I'll make that part of the story very short, my grandfather received a phone call from a politician and he was told to shut the business down overnight without any reason whatsoever. My grandfather had a heart attack and died there and then on hearing that news at the age of 52. So my father and mother are both the eldest on their sides of the family. My father was only 22 years old at the time. My mother was 19. And within 17 months in Kenya, they wound the whole business down and they were left with nothing. They had British overseas passports and they moved to England with my elder brother, who was born in England because my parents were moving back and forth a lot, and myself. So Gujaratis, a lot of Gujaratis in the United Kingdom are from East Africa, from Tanzania, Kenya or Uganda. So even when we speak fluent Gujarati, we have certain Swahili words in our language. Even in our Gujarati food in the United Kingdom, there'll be a lot of cassava and sweet corn. Unlike the Gujaratis who come from India directly to America, will be very traditional Gujaratis. So that's a little about our community in the United Kingdom. When Gujaratis went to England in those years, in the 1960s and 70s, they were very keen that their children study hard, like all Indians. But on the weekends, it was very important that Gujaratis congregated together in a local temple. The reason was simple, that they maintained their culture, they maintained their cuisine, they maintained their language. So all of us children growing up in London were taught to study very hard, learn from the English, their skills in administration, in business or in diplomacy and management. But on the weekends, we were always encouraged to stay with our own community so that we maintain our culture. So this was life growing up in London. Monday to Friday, it was a very Christian school where my brother and I went. We were the only coloured people in the whole school. At that time, it was very rare for Indians to be in the United Kingdom. And on the weekends, we were at the temple. My family is, or was as well, a very traditional Hindu family. We had a special room in our home dedicated to a house shrine, a Gar Mandir, where there were various idols. Every morning As soon as you wake up, you have to have a bath and go down into the house shrine. You pray, worship for half an hour, 40 minutes. Then you have breakfast and then you go to school. And when you come back from school, you wash your hands and feet and you go into the house shrine, you pay your respects, you worship for a while, and then you do your homework. And then even before the meal, the whole family gets together in the house shrine, you worship the idols, you offer food to the idols, and then you sit down to eat. This is a daily practice. So my mother, very dedicated, my father, very dedicated. The temple denomination that my parents belonged to believed that the Guru is God, and the way to God was through the Guru. It was a very small organization at the time, in the 1960s and 70s, and in London there was only one temple, and one temple in Leicester, 2 hours north of London. So it was very small, but growing up, this is where we congregated every weekend and sometimes on the weekdays. When I was 16 years old, I was in charge of the youth activities within the temple by this time. As I grew old, I got more and more interested in the scriptures, in the idols, in the worship, the festivals, the traditions. So I used to visit the temple a lot, even in the weekdays as well. When I was 16, the Guru from India had come to London. And like I said, for us, he was God. Whatever he said, whatever he did, we believed that God was doing that. And he came to the congregation, and I was asked to speak in the congregation, so I spoke from the ancient Hindu scriptures for about 20 minutes. And as a child in my school, my teachers also knew that I had a gift of speaking. So for me it was very easy, it was very fluent. And the Guru and the audience were very, very happy. So after my speech, I went to bow down at his feet. And immediately he said to me, you should become a Swami. You should become a sadhu, a monk, a priest. You'll be a very good one and you'll do great things for this organization. And immediately in my heart, I felt, okay, God is telling me to become a priest. And this must be my destiny. I'll be going to heaven. I'll please him, I'll please the whole community. So my heart just flooded with this excitement about God, heaven, and that nourishment, enlightenment, internal enlightenment. So I was only 16, and the Guru then said to me, why don't you travel with me to America? So after my exams in July in 1988, I came to the US. I also came to Detroit, to Cleveland, Columbus, we went to Pittsburgh, to Dayton. We traveled 48,000 miles for 4 months across the whole of US. And I saw him preach. I saw the other Swamis preach. I was only 16. And from that age, he taught me to learn how to preach to people the Hindu scriptures. So we traveled a lot. And everywhere we went in the audience, he would tell the people, this young boy will become a priest one day and will do great things for the organization. So everywhere we went, I got this attention, I got this recognition, so it fed my pride as well. I didn't know that it was feeding my pride, but something was being fed inside me. After the 4 months, I went back to London, and then I told my parents that I want to become a priest. My parents were very, very, very upset, because when you become a Swami in this organization, you have to have a lifetime of celibacy. You cannot get married. Obviously, then you cannot have children, which is a big upset to Indian culture. Secondly, you do not get paid as a priest. You cannot even have a bank account. You don't even touch money. If you touch money, you have to wash your hands 25 times. It was very extreme. So the lifestyle, the monastic lifestyle, was very, very extreme. No attachment. Finally, if you decide to become a priest, you can no longer even have any ties to your family. You can no longer talk to your parents. You can no longer meet with your parents. So the whole idea of detachment was very, very extreme and monastic in its nature. So my parents were very upset. But by this time, because I traveled with him across the US and spent so much time with him, I gained this godly affection towards him that He is my God, He's my Father, He's my Mother, and He's my way to heaven. So I became a fanatic. After 2 years of further study in the United Kingdom, my parents were really upset. And by then I found out that my elder brother also is now keen to become a Swami. He wanted to become a priest too. So we were so fanatic by this time, we both ran away from London to India to train to become priests. This is now 1991. We entered into the monastery in Gujarat. It's a 250-acre campus in the middle of the desert. It's like an oasis. And when you train to become a priest, it's a basic 6-year training. Very vigorous and very intense. At any time on the whole campus, there's about 150 people training to become priests, and they're trained by other senior priests. So the lifestyle discipline you start practicing from day one. You wake up at 4:45 every morning. That's actually late. And then you have a cold water bath. You meditate with your own prayer kit for 45 minutes, and then you all get together in the main Mandir campus for worship at 6 o'clock in the morning. So that tradition of doing arti together 5 times a day was compulsory throughout the whole training. But then throughout the day you have classes, you learn Sanskrit, you study all the different Hindu philosophies. So some of you probably know that the word Hindu is a name given by the British and the Persians. So the British in the early 1900s, when they had found archaeological findings in the Indus Valley, which is in today's Pakistan, they decided that they would call the people of India Hindus. It's actually because they found these archaeological findings along the river Sindh, and they couldn't pronounce the word Sindh properly. So they called the people of India Hindus, and hence the name India because of the river Sindh. Does that make sense to you? So Hinduism consists of hundreds of religions because there are 330 million gods in the scriptures itself. Hinduism is very diverse. Some Hindus believe in the soul, other people do not believe in the soul. Some Hindus eat meat, others do not eat meat. In some temples there are animal sacrifices, in other temples there is no such thing. So Hinduism is just as diverse as is Buddhism to Islam, for example. So throughout the 6 years of training, you study all the different Hindu philosophies and doctrines and ideas. And then for us, we studied that particular denomination in detail as well. So it's a lifestyle of academia. You study very hard, you pass your exams. There are 3-hour examinations every 2 weeks. In my first month in 1991, this is when my first issue arose deep in my heart. I was upstairs in the mandir, in the temple, in the arati, and all 150 Swamis were bowing down to the idols. We were singing together. And as we were bowing down, suddenly I just heard this very silent whisper in my left ear which said, "Have you made the right decision? Are you in the right place?" It was it wasn't audible, but you know when you have that sort of sense, somebody's just said something. It was very authentic, it was very real, and it really shook me. So I stood up. I remember this moment vividly. I stopped bowing and I looked over the balcony, and I didn't say it verbally, but in my heart I said, "Oh my goodness, what have I done? I've left my family, I've left England, I've come here, and what have I done?" But very quickly I thought that that must be the voice of the devil trying to stop me in my destiny, in my calling, in the plan that the Guru has for me. So I suppressed it. But then as I started training in the training center over the next few months, studying hard, doing meditation, fasting 5 times a month, I noticed that all the other Swamis that were there for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, there was no internal change. There was a lot of rules and regulations in their life, a lot of external holiness, a lot of fasting, a lot of chanting, a lot of meditation. But I had noticed that there was no personality change, there was no internal change. So the Guru had come to the monastery after 6 months and I sat with him personally. He had told me from day one that if ever you have any questions, you don't need to ask anybody senior in the organization, you can meet me whenever you want to meet me. And so I sat with him and I said to him that I have doubts. He said, what are your doubts? I said, well, I've noticed that I've been practicing meditation, chanting, fasting, focusing my mind, reading all the scriptures. And in my life, in the last 2-3 years, I've not seen any internal change. That's the first thing. The second thing is I'm looking at all these other senior priests. Externally, it all looks really good. But internally, I've noticed that there is no change in their swabhav. That's the Sanskrit word of swabhav. You may have heard of this word. He said to me that you ask too many questions. Your mind is doubting too much. Don't trust your mind. Then I said to him, but I feel that that's brainwashing if I'm not allowed to ask any decent questions. He said that your mind will be controlled by the devil if you ask too many questions. I said, fair enough. And I left the room. I agreed with him, but you know the problem had already started here. I finished the 6 years of training in 1995. That's when I was ordained. I was then given the orange robes and a full shaven head. I was given a new name. And then the Guru placed me in Bombay. Another thing that happened along with all these other questions and doubts in those 5-6 years was that my health got worse and worse. I got malaria 5 times. I kept on getting viral infections. In Bombay I felt sick. I was taking antibiotics, Norflox and ciprofloxacin and amoxicillin. Every 25-30 days I was getting some sort of infection. So I became more and more sad, more and more weak, and just more and more weary. Again, the Guru had come to Bombay, and by this time I was really sick. Now externally things were really good. My progress and success in the ministry was very good. People were happy. More and more youth were coming to the temple. Different programs had taken place. New courses had started. So externally things were growing very fast. The senior priests were happy with my work. The trustees were happy with my work. Reports were going to Guruji wherever he was in the world. And I was getting feedback via letter from the Guruji that you're doing great work. Everyone is really happy and you're successful in everything you touch. But inside, I was emotionally in turmoil and physically very sick. So he had come to Bombay and I sat with him again and I said, look, I just keep falling ill. If I keep falling ill, then I might as well go home back to my parents. I just said it casually like this. And he got very, very annoyed with me. He said, your destiny is now in these orange robes. You're going to die in these orange robes. There is no going home. You're going to be going to heaven. And you're going to do great things for this organization. Okay, fine, you don't have to stay in Bombay. I will now put you in London. You look after the whole of Europe and Russia. There is nothing there right now. Only 25 people in Paris. And I want you to develop that whole continent. So immediately I felt a relief because I was going to go back to London at least. So I came to London in 1997. And very quickly I started working hard in Europe. I traveled once a week into one European destination. Over the 15 years, I did 400 trips into Europe. I visited Paris 92 times, Portugal 45 times, Belgium 25 times, and I started getting busy. You know, when you have a lot of pain, you start getting busy to bury the pain. When you have questions and doubts, one way to suppress it is to get very busy. So I just did that. I started traveling, I started building temples. Very soon a temple was built in Portugal. I built another one in Paris, and another one in Belgium, another center in Milan, in Rome, in Sweden, Norway, Moscow. And things grew very fast. Externally, there was a lot of success. I was meeting prime ministers, the president of the European Union, the president of Portugal. I established the organization, I helped establish the organization a seat in the United Nations, in Geneva, in Vienna, and things started to externally really grow, and things became very successful. But you know, as everything started flowing and moving forward, my questions started coming to the surface more and more again. And I realized that I had a very intense restlessness inside. Externally, it was very easy to give a speech. It was very easy to give advice to members in the congregation. But I just knew that inside I was very restless. Something was always disturbing me. So I decided to study the Hindu scriptures again. So I went back into the Mahabharata, the Ramayana. I read it again 4 times. I went into the Gita, studied the Upanishads again, the Vedas again. And nothing, it was really smart language. It was very intelligent language, but nothing was sort of speaking to me or feeding me. And then I started researching other gurus, and I started listening to their talks, their wisdom, their spiritual insight. And I tried a bit of that as well. And then I met this very famous guru in India who does breathing and yoga, and how you can calm your thoughts and how you can calm your anxiety through breathing, a very famous one. I sat with him one-to-one and I talked to him. He said, try this, try this. I started practicing that. After a few weeks, even that collapsed. So this journey continued and I became really desperate. Then I started reading self-help books, like The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I just wanted internal change. Nothing was changing inside my heart. I started reading the 15-Second Principle by Al Secunda, Tony Robbins' work, Zig Ziglar's work, and different things, you know, outside in change, but nothing was really working. In the middle of all this busyness, building temples, building congregation, very soon there were 1,600 people in my congregation. And this search with other Hindu scriptures, I once visited Rome. In Rome there were only 9 people in the congregation, and they took me to the Vatican, to the Sistine Chapel, where the Pope prays every Saturday. And we went inside the Vatican, and then I sat in the Sistine Chapel. And I remember this moment vividly. My wife and I recently visited Rome again, just for a holiday, but it was a very great memory for me. The Swiss guards gave me a special seat under the painting of the Last Judgment. And I just sat there, you know. And I looked up at the stories of Jesus on one side, and I looked at this side, and you know, all of Michelangelo's beautiful frescoes and his work. And I remember saying to myself, I didn't know the stories of Jesus, but I remember saying to myself, my goodness, this all makes sense. That's all I said to myself. It just makes sense. I didn't know how, I didn't know what, but it just makes sense. I didn't tell anyone that. I went back upstairs into the main basilica, and then I saw the statue of Mother Mary with Jesus on her lap after taking him down off the cross, the Pieta by Michelangelo. And I found something really attractive beyond the statue, beyond the art, beyond the architecture. There was something really pulling me. I found it really fascinating. So when I went back to my hotel that very night, when everyone was asleep, I left the hotel. You know, as a Sadhu, you're not allowed to leave any campus or residence on your own. You have to go in pairs. But I snuck out secretly, and I walked down a road, and I remember looking at the Vatican. And it wasn't the structure, it wasn't the statues of Jesus and the apostles, but I noticed that there was something very beautiful beyond that was attracting me. So my journey continued like this. I found something fascinating within churches. I used to just walk inside churches in my orange robes, and members of my congregation would ask me, why are you going inside churches? I said, I just love the art, the architecture, and I want to learn from Christians how they do their management, how they run their organizations and their denominations. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was I just enjoyed the walk inside different churches. And by this time, my position in the organization was very high, so people couldn't challenge me very easily. They couldn't confront me so easily. So then, by 2007, the CEO of the organization said, you know, Swami, you have to now study even more in-depth Hindu scriptures and start preaching in America as well. So we will design a program for you. You visit India once a year for 20 days and you learn from the ancient scholars that we have there, the ancient scriptures from the scholars in India. So I agreed. I said, okay, fine. If that's what you want me to do, I will do that as well. So in the middle of traveling and developing Europe once a year, I went back to India, to the monastery, to different scholars. I studied the Upanishads and the Veda in more depth to translate it into English to preach to people in the United States. I started traveling to the United States more and more. By now, I had become a very influential speaker in the organization. Whenever I would come to the US and if there was a national convention, the attendance would rise by 25% if they knew that I was attending their conference. So the paradox though, however, was that people would give a standing ovation before I would even come to the mic. They would clap after my speeches, but I would go into my room afterwards and take an antidepressant. It was a very paradoxical lifestyle. When I would speak, I would tell the members of the congregation, please don't record this talk. Because deep inside, I didn't believe what I was preaching. But they would still record my speeches, and they would still send the speeches to different parts of the world. Once I asked my congregation in Norway, I said, do you actually believe everything that I'm preaching to you? They said, of course we believe you. You're wearing orange robes, you're not married, you don't have a bank account, you don't touch money, so you must be telling the truth. And so it shocked me that if you just wear orange robes and you have an external holy appearance, people just believe everything and anything you have to say. It was such an easy way to mislead people down a certain path. I said, do you not check? Do you not feel like asking me any questions about what I'm preaching? They said, no, we believe everything you're saying. So this made me even more sick inside. And in these years, I still started going in and out of hospitals in London, in New York, in Chicago, in Houston. By 2010, I was taking 40 tablets a day of different medication. I had different illnesses in my body, still busy traveling, still building the organization, still studying hard, still searching for truth, searching for that nourishment. It just wasn't coming, it wasn't coming. As I was studying once in Switzerland, I was studying Swami Vivekananda's books, 9 to 12 volumes. I was sitting and I was just reading, and I remember this. Again, that whisper came into my ear, Jesus Christ of Nazareth, as I was reading a Hindu book. And it was such a sweet voice, it was so authentic, so real. I quickly, threw it aside because I was wearing orange robes and I was preaching Hinduism, and where did this Jesus Christ of Nazareth come from, this whisper? I just threw it aside and I continued preaching. But these very small and subtle encounters with the Christian faith, with the person of Jesus, they continued. And so my interest continued. So once I told a close friend of mine, will you go and buy me a children's Bible, the one with all the pictures in there? So everyone knew I loved reading. I used to read a lot of novels and different types of books. So he didn't question why I wanted to read the Bible. He just thought I wanted to acquire some more knowledge. So he went and bought me the Bible, and I remember this moment. I sat in my office, I locked the door, and I opened the pages of this big volume of a children's Bible. And as I started reading, it was a fascinating, simple, small, and short moment. As I started reading, I really felt something speaking back to me. And so I quickly shut the book, and I put it in the shelf in the middle of all my other books, and I never touched it again. But I really remembered that experience. It was a fascinating experience. So now, as I traveled the world more and more, I still believed mentally that the Guru is my God and he's my father and my mother, so I still preached that. But my theology started changing a little. I started preaching of a bigger God, a more beautiful God, a different God. I didn't know which God, but I just knew that God cannot be confined to an idol in a temple or a guru who only looks after a certain Gujarati community around the world. God must be much bigger than this. So I started preaching that more and more. I noticed people were interested. In Orlando in 2007, I was giving the keynote speech, and I read a Hindu verse, and I spoke for 10 minutes. All I did was read the verse, and whatever I felt I should say about the event, about God and his involvement in the event, was nothing to do with Hindu scriptures. And everybody stood up and started clapping. And then I went and sat down next to my friend who was a Swami as well, and he said, "My goodness, how did you translate that Hindu scripture with that understanding of God?" I said, I didn't tell him, but I said that had nothing to do with Hindu Shastra or Hindu scripture. I just said what I felt I should say, how God should be in our lives. So I noticed that there's something more than this. There's something bigger and more beautiful than this. But as I said, by 2010, my body was very sick. I had, traveled and traveled and traveled all my life, searching, seeking. I went to India and did a pilgrimage of 2,000 miles. I started in Gujarat, and I went up Mount Girnar, which is 10,000 steps, to the shrine of Dattatreya. I did that 3 times, just to find something. You start at 8 o'clock in the morning, and you have to be back by 5 o'clock, because there are lions in that region of Junagadh, in that region. So you climb so high, you go into the clouds, and then you offer your respects to Dattatreya, you come back down. And I went across India to Ram Janmabhoomi, to Krishna Janmabhoomi. I bathed in the Ganges, the Yamuna, the Saraswati. I went all the way east to Bodhi Gaya. I did also a lot of pilgrimages down in the south as well, to sacred Hindu sites, searching, asking, and wondering if I could find something, that would nourish me, that would really satisfy me. But nothing really happened, and so my sickness was manifesting from my internal turmoil. So I spoke to my brother, who was in New Jersey at the time. I said, "Look, I've been to all the best hospitals in London. I've been to Chicago, New York, and Houston as well, and do you know any other clinics that can solve all these issues that I have in my body?" He said, "There is the Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville, Florida." So my doctor in London sent a file to the clinic in Jacksonville, Florida. I came here to the US in 2010, in October, and I went into the clinic, and there were 5 doctors. Each of them were chairmen of their department, and they had my file. And I was only 40 years old at the time, and they said, "My goodness, you're this young and you've got all these sicknesses, what is wrong with you?" And 2 of those doctors, they became really close friends of mine, and they still are friends of mine today. I stayed in that clinic for 10 months. It was Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. I had different treatment for different issues in my body, pain, this, that, and the other. And Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I used to preach around the US, and that continued. But in the midweek, I was forced to rest. I had to stay confined in one home, and that's where a lot of my issues here started coming to the surface and articulating here in my mind. I didn't know what, but a lot of stuff. When you don't have a chance to become busy, you have to start dealing with yourself. It was that sort of situation. After 10 months of treatment, a lot of my medication had come down. I was only on 2-3 different types of medication. I came back to London. I stayed in London for a month, and then I said, "Okay, let's go and meet Guruji," because I had not seen him for 1.5 years. So he's still like my mother and father. You know, I'd served him for this many years and I still felt that closeness to him. He was in Bombay, and so I flew to Bombay. And as I landed in Bombay and I went to the temple in Dadar, one of my friends who's a Swami there, he took me to the side very quickly and he said, listen, there is a plot against you. There are questions at a senior level about your theology, about some of your speeches. We know that you have a lot of influence on the people's mind and you're changing the way they are thinking and about the Hindu doctrine. So when the senior Swamis meet you, just submit and do whatever they say. I said, thanks for the heads up, but for the first time in my 20s, I said, I'm not going to submit. I'll just meet the Guruji, I'll explain to him what I feel, and he always backed me. I had a lot of favor. I was known as the chosen one for him because he used to always back me. I never had to go through the senior priest or the trustees to talk to him. Whenever I wanted to phone him, I could have that access. So I said, I'll speak to him and then I'll tell him what my thoughts are about God and my beliefs and where I'm at, and I'll be fine. Then I can handle anyone. But as I entered into the room to meet him personally, the other senior Swamis came and said that we're coming in with you. You're not going to have your meeting on your own. So I realized that, okay, this is something more serious than me just visiting him to say hello. So we went in the room, and it was only a 20-minute meeting. To be honest, it was very short, but it felt like a lifetime. The first thing everyone said was, this young fellow's theology is very wrong. He needs to correct his doctrine and be realigned again to our fundamental beliefs. So the Guruji, as punishment, said to me, I'm going to keep you now in the villages of India, where you have no influence on people's minds, thoughts and hearts. And so for the first time in my life, I said no to God. I said, I'm not going to stay in India. I'm going back to London. So because of his compassion towards me, he said, okay, fine then, I'll put you in a small town in America, in a small temple in America where there is not a big congregation, so that you do not influence too many people. Again, I said, no, I'm not going to go to America. I'm going to stay in London. Then the whole room started in a big debate. These were really seriously senior priests, and they were saying things that he needs to do this, he needs to stay here for a while, he needs to learn this for a while, this for a while. And people were just discussing my life, and in the middle of all of that, I just said it quietly. I said, listen, I don't want to be a Swami anymore. I just want to go home. Can you let me go home? It just came out of my mouth. And strangely, I felt this peace. But to my shock, the Guru dad said, okay, go, leave. And I thought, oh my goodness, I've served you for 20 years. There was nothing in Europe and Russia. I built this congregation, sending tens of thousands of pounds to India for all the temples in India, hundreds of thousands of pounds. And is that it? You go? I didn't say that verbally, but I just sat there and I stood up. As I was leaving the room, he said to me, you go on 2 conditions. You never give a speech again ever in your life. The reason was because of the influence I had in the way I would speak. As a Swami, I was never invited. Well, sometimes I was not invited to certain meetings because I would change the direction of the meetings. So many board meetings took place when I was in Europe or America because people had already decided that they wanted something done, so they would make sure I was not there. So he said, never give a speech again in your life. I said, fine, I don't mind. I'll never give a speech again in my life. I didn't care because I didn't believe what I was saying anyway. And the second condition, he said, was that you don't speak to anyone that you know in the whole 20 years. And we'll make sure that nobody speaks with you. I said, fine. And I left the room and I called my brother, which was the saddest part because he was my best friend for 40 years of my life. He was in New York at the time. I said, look, this is what's happened. And I'm now leaving after 20 years. And he was really sad, and that really saddened me as well. That night they took me to the airport. I gave away my orange robes, my orange prayer kit, and they gave me 2 pairs of trousers and 2 shirts, and I flew back to London. And one friend in London said, look, come and stay in my hotel. I'll make sure nobody knows that you're here, and let's see how we can find a job for you, you know, write a CV. How do you write a CV of somebody who's been a Hindu Swami for 20 years? That doesn't make any sense on a CV. The world doesn't care if you met the Prime Minister of England or the President of Portugal, or all that work, you know. I just felt really sad that, you know, where do I start? So I landed in London on December the 27th, 2011. I went to the hotel. He said to me, listen, for 4 weeks don't do anything. Don't think about anything. Just go for a walk, you know, and freshen up. You've been surrounded by people all your life. You've never been allowed on your own. Just go and walk on your own. So I said, okay, let's do that. And 2 weeks later, I was walking to a railway station in central London, just to go out and, you know, travel a little. And as I was walking to this station, suddenly my head turned literally 90 degrees. And by this time, I just want to say this, that my disappointment with God was huge in my heart. You know, I had searched and searched and searched and tried so many different things, and I had given up on the whole idea of God. I knew that I would have some sort of spiritual dimension to my mind and life, but the whole idea of God, it just left me. And so a slightly agnostic sort of, I thought I'll take an agnostic sort of approach and just keep it all New Age type spiritual, and that's it. But as I was walking to this station, my head turned literally 90 degrees. I don't know how it turned, well I know now. And there was this beautiful small 200-year-old church down this very quiet road. So I thought, okay, this must be like the churches in Rome and Portugal with all this beautiful art and gold and everything. Let me go and have a look at all the different paintings, and then I'll go to the city. It was a Sunday morning around 11:15 a.m. and I walked down the road, and as I turned to the main gate of this church, there were 2 people standing at the entrance with these incredible smiles, you know, welcoming people, and a lot of love on their faces, and you could feel the love. And for me it was very creepy because I had never been exposed to so much love, you know, unconditionally. Anyway, I remember I walked past them, I walked through the main door, and as I walked through the main door, the presence of God just fell on me incredibly, and this blanket of peace just covered me, and that voice came back again and said, you are now home. And that was it for me. I went inside the church, I sat upstairs on the second tier on my own, and this pastor was speaking, and everything he said just made sense to me. I had never seen worship on guitars and drums in my life, you know. I had always walked into traditional churches, but the worship was just beautiful, and this excitement started churning inside of me, and I was on my own sitting there. And I don't even know these people, but something was really clicking in my heart. After the service finished, I didn't go back downstairs for prayer. I left and I went back to the hotel room, and I sat on my bed, and I was just so excited, and I was so excited. I gave my life to Jesus in that one simple moment. And for me that was astounding, because as a Swami, you know, to convince me about anything was very difficult. I would debate, discuss anything and everything. And I walked into this church, and the presence of God was so thick, it was so powerful, so beautiful, and so comforting and soothing. I just knew that there's something, this Jesus thing is something really, really amazing. So the hotel, my friend at the hotel saw now that every Sunday I'm going into a church. So he wasn't so happy about that. So few months later, he threw me out of the hotel. I still hadn't found a job. And the situation was really, really bad at this time because there was a period where I had no money or no food. You know, it was a complete paradox change. You know, as a senior Swami, you're traveling the world, you have lots of food, you have lots of attention, you know, everything is luxurious. And here I didn't have a job, I didn't have a place to live. One friend in the church, you know, was helping me to find a job, a place to live. And he found out that I had not eaten for 3 days because I had no money. You know, as a Swami, you don't tell people your problems. You're supposed to help people. So I never knew that in church, that you tell people your problems. I just kept it to myself. I haven't got food, I haven't eaten for 3 days. He said, what, you've not eaten for 3 days? And he gave me some money. But I was just lying in his office, you know. I had no regrets about leaving. This is the strange thing. My situation was really bad, but it just did not cross my mind once that, oh my goodness, I shouldn't have left. And that day I was sitting on the sofa, I was just worried about work. Where will I get work? I need to find a job, to get some money, to find somewhere to live. And he said to me, you know what, go to church tonight, there's a worship session. And before the worship session, there's an hour of prayer, and it's called happy hour. Go and visit that. And I said, that's such a, you know, I thought that's quite cheesy, happy hour. I mean, what's happy hour? He said, go and I'll come with you. I went to the evening event, and there was only 5 of us standing there in prayer, and the 2 ladies were leading the worship, and they said to keep your hands like this, you know. And one of the girls said that if you just move a little, the spirit can then move, you know. And I said in my head, I understand that, but I'm not going to move around and do any of this kind of dancing and free and all of that. I'll just stand here and I'll keep it simple like this. But I sort of didn't close my eyes properly as well, because I was very curious as to what they were doing, and they were dancing and they were worshipping. And then suddenly the girl came and just put a hand on my shoulder. And as she put the hand on my shoulder, this incredible river of joy from deep inside my stomach, it just came to the surface, and I started laughing with this very, very deep joy. Not the laughter classes that you hear about, you know, because I even tried them as a Swami, you know, to kill my depression. Not that pretend to laugh, let's start laughing together so that it changes your attitude. I know about all that. This was something that wasn't from me, and it just came and it changed my countenance. And in that moment I thought, oh my goodness, you know, obviously it was a baptism of God's Holy Spirit in that time. I had read Arvinda's works on enlightenment, his transcendental mind. It's a mind-crunching thick book. This fellow went into silence for 18 years to seek enlightenment. I had read Vivekananda's works about enlightenment, Ramana Maharshi's works on enlightenment. And 2 days later I realized that everything that these guys were trying to achieve through work, me just standing there through grace, I got everything in Christ, what they were trying to achieve for all of their lives. And I thought, my goodness, is it that simple? So then, this was September in my first year. I knew that Jesus is alive, he's real. This is a living person, you know. And then I chased Jesus as much as I could after that, but the journey wasn't very easy because I had come from a religion, and this was now a relationship. The Hindus are all about doing and work and karma. And here, in my first year, God said, learn how to be loved by me. You're loved as you are. You cannot do anything that would make me love you anymore, and you've done nothing that can make me love you any less. You are loved as you are. And that was so difficult for me. I thought, what do I do? Which Bible school shall I go to? Which theology course shall I take? And which courses shall I get involved with? What do I do? And God said, nothing. You just learn how to be. Learn how to be loved and be nourished by me. So that whole journey took me 2 years, where God really worked then on my identity, and He still does today. Because it wasn't just worshipping idols in a temple, there were other idols here, of a famous speaker, or a fundraiser, or a temple builder, or a congregation builder. And God stripped everything away. You know, I had nothing, no titles, no name, nothing. I only had my British passport. And God said, okay, now just learn how to be loved. And this is what I'll teach you from day one. And so that became my journey, understanding relationship and sort of detoxing from religion. And that's been my journey since. You know, I was taught by God to just park everything, all my own personal aspirations and desires, and just learn to be loved by Jesus. And the journey's been beautiful. It's not always been easy, but I do know that walking with Christ is very simple. And I do know that He's real and He's alive, and He wants communion every single day. He wants it throughout the day. And my encouragement to myself right now as I'm standing here is to just keep that first love. That, you know, some of you are a similar story to me. And so I'm speaking to myself as I am speaking to you. And my encouragement to you is to hold on to that first love every single day. Always go back to that very basic and yet important thing of first love. Because sometimes when we get an encounter and we come to faith, we start getting involved in the busyness of Christianity and the courses and ministry, which is all good, but never at the cost of your personal, intimate time with the Lord at home. No church can feed you. Only Christ can at home. And it's how you develop that walk, communion in your home that should override everything. You know, you come to a church to serve from the overflow of that God's presence that you have fed on in your home. So this is, I say this to myself as well. And because it's so, I was then told by God that the same thing can happen again, even in the Christian framework. You can get very busy, you can start performing, you can start striving, and you can miss out on the very first fundamental encounter that you had that day, because you can have that every day. And so this is my message at the end of my story for today. I'm really grateful that you heard my story. Thank you again for inviting my wonderful wife. And God gave me a beautiful wife as well. We got married last year, and that's been a huge blessing. And you know, one by one things did fall together in my life. They did come into place, and it was just a miracle. I did get a job, you know. I got a job in a beautiful, beautiful place, and it was just right. It was just right, and I realized the people there loved me. It was the world's most exclusive gentleman's perfumery and hair salon and everything. It was an old 200-year-old establishment. It was a miracle. I'll just give you one testimony. You know, I still hadn't found a job, and I was living in a room in a part of London. I went to a local church, and the pastor was preaching, and she said, 4 weeks from today there's going to be a miracle. And I received that word for myself. I didn't know what, where. And I was still searching for a job. I was dropping CVs in different, you know, parts of London, in anything and everything that looked good. I thought, okay, let's put something there, you know. And 4 weeks to that day, I get a phone call from the owner of this very, very prestigious company, and said, "Are you Rahil?" I said, "Yes." "Are you looking for a job?" I said, "Yes." "Do you know a little about the Trumper brand?" I said, "Yes." That wasn't the truth. I didn't know. She said, "Will you come tomorrow and I'll interview you?" I quickly went back to my friend's office. I Googled who they are, and I said, okay, this is who they are. I remember dropping that CV. The next day I went to this place. She looked at me, and without any other questions, she said, "You look like a friendly face. Would you like to work for me?" And that was it. And after that, you know, everything, I just saw how God put things into place. That's the place where I wrote my book. My biography was written in that place, in my lunch break, my tea break. And the very owner of that company said that we will sell your books in our shops. In Mayfair and St. James's, where 90% of UK's leaders, politicians, celebrity, CEOs of big corporations, they come for their haircut there. Stephen Fry or Ian McKellen or Michael Howard, senior politician, and they see a book there. Hindu priest encounters Jesus Christ. They say, who is the Crown Prince of Kuwait? And everybody asks, who is this young boy? And then my boss, who was a Muslim, but it's the Indian boy who works for us. And so my testimony was shared on the shop floor in the most prestigious perfumery in the world. So wherever God then sent me, it was always a blessing. And it was difficult to understand in the beginning, but then God's been showing me some beautiful things, and even coming here and this connection with Ravi, it's really, really interesting for me, because I can see the whole redemptive circle now. This is the first time I've come to the US to speak. I used to speak in the US a lot, and I never thought it would happen again, and I didn't really care. But God had a plan, and I'm here. And Ravi didn't know even how to find me. He was just Googling, and I was in India with my wife, and we were speaking in Chennai, and he said, well, would you come to Cleveland? And I said, we need to come back and pray about this. And we went back to London, we spoke to him on Skype, and here we are, in Detroit, a place where I'd come in 1988 with the Guru. And I remember all of those events in Detroit, in Cleveland, in Chicago, and now I'm sharing this. So it's very special for me to be here. So thank you once again for listening to me.